Hello, and welcome back to Kojo Recaps. Today I'm going to explain a 2017 science fiction horror film called Life. Watch out, spoilers ahead. Be sure to like and share the love. The movie starts with a spaceship dedicated to collecting a capsule which contains samples from Mars. Unfortunately, the capsule was struck by debris and veered off course. So one of the astronauts, Rory, decides to grab the capsule manually with a robotic arm, placing himself in great danger while doing so. We see the other astronauts, Sho and David, helping him to get ready for the mission. The rest of the astronauts are optimistic but very nervous about the retrieval of the capsule. Fortunately, Rory manages to catch the capsule, and everyone is very excited to inspect the samples. In the next scene, we see Hugh inspecting and separating the samples to run different tests on them, and he observes similarities with organisms on Earth. Hugh changes the environment of the box where the organism is to try and bring it to life, and he succeeds. The organism starts moving a little bit. They have discovered life beyond Earth. In the next scene, Kat is having a video chat with people on Earth and answers questions from kids about the alien life that they've discovered. We find out that David has been in the spaceship for the longest, but he doesn't mind, he enjoys his job. People from Earth decide to name the alien organism Calvin. David has been in space for too long and his body is starting to break down. The atrophy has accelerated and he is close to his radiation limit, but he doesn't care very much. He would rather be up there than on Earth. In the next scene, we see that the organism has developed and is now a multicellular organism. And it's now responsive to the environment and to the astronauts' fingers. They are all fascinated. The astronauts are celebrating their success and have fun while Sho watches his child's birth. After everything goes well, he delivers the good news to the rest of the astronauts. Hugh continues experimenting with the alien and starts to bond with it a little bit. All the astronauts are then shocked by an alarm coming from the lab, but the problem is quickly fixed. Unfortunately, Calvin has been unresponsive for a couple of weeks due to that malfunction, and Hugh decides to stimulate it using electricity. So in the next scene, he tries to do just that, but nothing happens at first. After a couple of tries, though, Calvin wakes up and immediately grabs Hugh's hand. After Hugh tries to distract Calvin, he gets even more aggressive and breaks Hugh's fingers, making the rest of the astronauts very anxious. Calvin then manages to escape using the electric rod and eats a lab mouse. At the same time, Rory opens the door and enters the lab, trying to pull Hugh out of the lab who is unconscious. While doing so, Calvin grabs Rory's leg, so David closes the door in an attempt to keep Calvin in an enclosed environment, and Rory understands that. In an attempt to free himself from Calvin, Rory tries to burn him with an oxygen rod, and then with a flamethrower, but with no result. Calvin then manages to go inside Rory's mouth and kills him. At the same time, the astronauts are all terrified, and they argue if they should open the door to help Rory or not. Unfortunately, the fire extinguishers open from the ceiling, and Calvin tries to enter the ship's pipes, considerably larger now. Sho is trying to manually override the system and shut the fire extinguishers down, but Calvin manages to enter the last one, leaving everyone in shock. They are all terrified because they don't know where Calvin is. They try to communicate with Earth to let them know about the situation, and that they will try to isolate Calvin following the protocol, but the signal is lost. They come to the conclusion that they have to fix the transmitters manually, which are on the outside of the ship, and Kat decides to go on this mission. She goes to the transmitter and finds that the problem is overheating. Calvin is inside the cooling systems, and at some point he jumps onto Kat and is much larger. Kat closes the valve while Alvin twists her leg. She tries to go to the airlock, but Calvin messed up her suit, and liquid is all over the inside, blocking her vision. She reaches the airlocks, but she refuses to open the valve, because she doesn't want Calvin to enter the ship again, and she decides to jump into space with the hope that Calvin will be lost with her. Unfortunately, Calvin manages to jump back onto the spaceship, making everyone lose hope. They are all devastated about the loss of their two friends. They find out that Calvin could enter the ship through the thrusters, so they try to prevent him from entering by powering one thruster at a time, depending on where Calvin is. But they are low on fuel and they have entered a decaying orbit. They will soon hit Earth, so they decide to use the rest of the fuel to correct their orbit. Calvin gets in the ship and the crew discusses possible solutions. They decide to remove the ship's atmosphere so that Calvin will hibernate again, like he did when the labs malfunction. Hugh's heart stops at some point, and they try to revive him. While doing so, they find out that Calvin is eating Hugh's paralyzed legs all of the time. Miranda electrocutes him, and a huge Calvin is revealed. They try to escape, but Sho is trapped in a sleeping pod with Calvin right outside. He has lost communication with the others. Calvin tries to break the pod by squeezing it, but he fails. Miranda and David return to Hugh to comfort him in his last moments, but he eventually dies. Calvin swallowed a tracker on Hugh's leg, so he can now track him inside the ship. Calvin then follows a trail of Hugh's blood, and Miranda and David manage to trap him in a chamber. They try to vent the chamber, but at the same time we find out that some of Kat's distress call has reached Earth, and reinforcements have come, and they will try to dock exactly where Calvin is. They soon find out that the ship is not there to help them, but to push them into deep space in an attempt to prevent Calvin from going to Earth. Sho, who is still in the pod, thinks it's a rescue and tries to go to the other ship, and he opens the door connecting the two spaceships, so Calvin kills the other crew members and grabs Sho's leg. To stop Calvin from killing the other two, Sho grabs him and he is sucked in the vacuum, but Calvin manages to stay on the ship. David and Miranda manage to get to safe space, but the conditions of the ship are not good. They only have 2 hours left on the spaceship, and they find out that they are in a decaying orbit again because of the two ships' collision. They come to the conclusion that Calvin could survive re-entry on Earth's atmosphere, but they couldn't. So they decide to come up with a plan. David will lure Calvin into one of the lifeboats, where he will be inside and he will manually drive it into deep space. Miranda will use the other lifeboat to safely go back to Earth. Miranda is hesitant at first about letting David die, but eventually she comes around and agrees with the plan. David manages to lure Calvin using the oxygen rods into the lifeboat, while Miranda enters the other lifeboat. David gains manual control over the lifeboat and drives himself and Calvin into deep space, while Miranda begins going down to Earth. Miranda's ship lands on Earth safely, and David's goes into deep space. But in the end, we find out that's the exact opposite of what happened. Calvin took control of David's lifeboat and changed its trajectory toward Earth, and because of a malfunction, Miranda's ship went into deep space. Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for the next episode of Kojo Recaps. Until next time, dear viewer,